This is CNN Tonight, live from New York. Here again, Erica Hill.
Joining me now, all CNN contributors, Miguel Perez, syndicated columnist and professor at Lehman College, Errol Louis, columnist from the New York Daily News, and Robert Zimmerman, Democratic strategist. Here to talk a little politics, especially as we near the end of the year for President Obama. I do want to start, though, tonight with climate change, because earlier today, obviously, the president coming out saying we have this agreement, calling it an unprecedented breakthrough. Errol, I'll start with you tonight on this. Before we get into the agreement itself, how badly did the president need this?
I think he needed to get something, and this reflects the kind of different calculus that the White House has than the rest of us. You know, we're all looking at healthcare reform, climate change, and other goals. We compare it to what he said on the campaign trail. We compare it to what all of the pundits say and what all of the professors say. They're using political calculus. He needed something, and so he got something, and he wasn't going to leave without something. And, you know, what it means for him politically will be very different from what it means for the climate, for example.
What he needs to do is equate the critical issues around climate change to jobs in America, to our economy, to being free of being dependent on foreign oil. And that's his great challenge, to make this issue a reality. The most recent poll came out and showed that the country's support for him on global warming declined from 61% to 45%. Now, I admire him for taking on an issue that is not necessarily popular at home. And if we let polls guide us, FDR never would have fought World War II. But that's a fact. Right. But now the issue is making clear why this is critical to our economy, and that's the White House's critical challenge.
And the economy for most Americans is still issue number one. Miguel, does this translate? You know, Robert was pointing out some of the hurdles there in making this translate for Americans. But on the surface, when you look at this, I mean, does it really mean anything for the U.S. and for Americans at home?
No, not really, but it doesn't mean anything for anybody around the world either. Specifically, you know, if you take climate change affects the whole world, and we all have to sacrifice. I mean, the agreement, the president called it unprecedented, and it's unprecedented because anything would have been unprecedented at this point. But he called it meaningful, and I don't really think it's that meaningful. I think the president looked disappointed when he was speaking because he obviously expected more. Unfortunately, he doesn't even have the backing of the Senate right now so that he could go out and be a stronger leader on this issue.
But, you know, in his first and most soaring speeches in the early part of the campaign season last year, he said, let this be known as the moment we began to reverse the heating of the earth, and we were going to do this and do that. And the fierce urgency of now. I mean, he can't now just turn around and say the fierce urgency of whenever. So he's trying to satisfy the environmental portion of his political base, which is not insignificant.
Right.
He's trying to do substantively what he said he was going to try and do.
But they're not exactly rallying around the Senate. I mean, we heard Ed Henry earlier tonight. He was saying, and I may not have this verbatim correct, but Greenpeace was calling this. They said it wasn't fair. They said it wasn't ambitious. A number of Democrats saying, you know, does this really amount to anything?
And the Sierra Club, in fact, endorsed it and spoke about it being a positive first step. You know, anytime you have 119 nations come together around anything, it's significant. And when they come together and, in fact, acknowledge the need to reduce carbon emissions, that's a very critical first step. And so I think there's obviously this agreement has great significance. Most importantly, it can motivate the Senate, which has been saying, why should we move forward if the developing and developed nations don't also move forward?
Is it enough, though? Is it enough, really, Miguel, to make the Senate move forward? Because, as you mentioned, there's not a lot of there.
No, and if the president, I mean, even if the Congress passes what they've been talking about, the legislation the House already passed and the Senate, it's very limited compared to some of what the industrialized nations have already vowed to do. So the president is in between the upcoming nations and the industrialized nations, which want us to do a lot more. Right. And he's somewhere in the middle trying to seek this balance. What is amazing to me is that this whole thing is looking a lot like the healthcare reform bill, because, you know, the meaningful...
You're stealing my next question,
you know, they're diluting this thing to the point where it'll be meaningless at the end. That's my concern.
The bigger problem is for a White House that is so on message, and for a president who has been so captivating with his message, not to be able to equate either health care to the American economy, the American working family, or to take this issue of climate change and equate it to jobs, equate it to health, equate it to energy independence, independence of domestic oil.
They've tried a little bit. I mean, there have certainly been those those attempts to make that happen. So, Errol, why haven't they succeeded there?
Well, I mean, look, the green-collar job, which is the connection, right? The transformation of the U.S. economy, and we'll start making solar panels and all of this kind of stuff. That doesn't play on the international stage. I mean, that's really kind of why it falls apart. I mean, this was not the place for that.
But in terms of selling it here at home, which really, you know, most people watching tonight, that's what matters more.
Sure,
is how is this going to affect me?
Look, people who didn't go to Copenhagen just to protest and so forth, I think are going to be somewhat impressed at the depth of what's in that final document, at least the aspirations. And I think for the majority here, I don't think people saw this as a jobs trip. I think people saw this as an opportunity for him to try and live up to some of his campaign.
I'm going to have you hold that thought because we have to take a quick break, but we're not done. We'll be back. Okay. Continue talking about this, and also what you brought up as well, Miguel, whether or not this actually shadows of health care as well here when it comes to the president's agenda. Stay with us. We'll be back with more from our political panel in just a moment. Back now with our panel: Robert Zimmerman, Errol Louis, Miguel Perez. Miguel, I want to touch on something you brought up before the break, which we wanted to touch on as well. That this agreement, this unprecedented breakthrough, as the president called it earlier, coming out of Copenhagen, there may not be as much substance to it. It's a first step. A lot of people are looking at the health care bill now and saying it has been stripped of so much. There isn't a lot of substance there either. Is that an accurate assessment?
Yes, and the word meaningful that the president used today to talk about what happened in Copenhagen is exactly the same word that I fear the Democrats may end up using. Oh, it's a meaningful legislation, when in fact it's very diluted. And the Republicans can then turn around and say, oh, look at the immigration bill they passed, it's worthless.
Right. So is it worth it then? Because as we all know, we're, 2 weeks away from 2010. But those elections, I mean, it's already heating up. And you can tell, really, when you watch in Washington, what a lot of lawmakers are doing. They're concerned about the seat, obviously. So is it smart, Errol, to continue along this road if you're not getting a lot out of it?
Well, sure. I mean, I don't. First of all, I don't know what choice you have. You know, I mean, the reality is
you can't really stop now.
And not just that, but not every problem will yield, 100% to you. You know, and so they've gotten the first of 3 cloture votes that are going to be used to sort of move the Senate bill through. They're going to get something done. They're going to try and get something done. I understand Congress being nervous. Historically, about 16 seats get lost by the president's party in the off year like this, and so for them it's musical chairs. Who's not going to be here next year? And they're going to get a little squirrely. But the White House, they've got a whole bunch of achievements that I think we're going to see them recapitulate, and remind the nation of as the 1-year anniversary of the inauguration approaches.
On the merits, any health care legislation that in fact eliminates discrimination towards women of childbearing years, allowing them to get insurance, blocks individuals from being denied insurance for pre-existing conditions, deals with preventative care. These are important achievements legislatively, and I don't think they should be diminished, and there certainly are unprecedented. Likewise, the idea of expanding coverage to 36 million, perhaps more Americans who don't have health care is important. The issue here, though, is how to drive the message home, how to drive this achievement home to the American people. And what's happening now in Congress, and the reason you see such concern, is that in fact, while the polling numbers have gone down because the debate, the back and forth is really dominating, is really clouding the real accomplishments. And for the Democrats, they've obviously got to put this bill through so they can get on to jobs soon.
And it is, Candy Curley, I think, made a great point earlier tonight. The concern really is for the Democrats because they have a limited number of time here. The president still has almost 3 years to work on things. So how significant is that when you look at his achievements?
Not just that, he's got a couple of years to sell it, and he's a better salesman than any one of the members of Congress. So he'll be fine. They may not be so fine.
Overall, this effect, is it going to be really damaging for Democrats come the fall?
I believe so, because again, the Democratic Party has proven to be very divided on this very, very important issue. The Republicans are united, at least in their opposition. Right. The Democrats are the ones who are divided, and it's going to hurt them.
If we go into group therapy, which is often our practice when we're under fire, we're going to lose ground. If we get out there and equate why healthcare helps us economically, why it creates jobs, why, in fact, climate change helps keep jobs in America.
But why does it take getting to this point to rally your party to do that? Because clearly there's been a problem for a long time.
Well, I think you're right. You're absolutely correct. The party has not stayed focused on a clear and defining message. And hopefully, when this legislation comes to fruition and it's adopted, they can carry a clear message as to what it is. Part of the problem is this bill has been changing on a regular basis.
And the problem is it's too long for anybody to know what it really is, and because it is changing on a regular basis.
We haven't even read it. It's not even
need an outlet.
Yeah, the other
And the
problem is we're
Senate's like,
out of time. But gentlemen, thank you all very much. I hope nobody gets snowed in this weekend. Miguel Perez, Errol Louis, Robert Zimmerman, thanks again. Just ahead, President Obama, as we've been talking about, announcing this non-binding agreement on climate change. Critics already saying it's not going to change much. Two leading experts weigh in next.